forgot I had my mic muted. Welcome to another episode of Aselia the Eternal. This is going to be another different video, I should say. Hopefully interesting. It's pretty late for me. I'm waiting for my clothes to get out of the dryer, so I figured I would do a sort of update video on our spirits. This is mission 10. As you can see, we have 131 total turns played, or 130 turns played plus the current turn. We have 16 bases. We've used up a good amount of total mana left in the world, although we still have quite a bit to go, as you can tell. And we have trained a lot of our units over the past couple of missions, the last two missions in particular. And I felt like it would be worthwhile to talk about how I'm feeling about each of the spirits individually, why I use them the way that I do, why I may choose not to use them in the future very much, things like that. We also just got 2 new units, and this is the first time that we've really had access to them. So I figure this is as good a time as any to go over my thoughts at this point in the game. So let's start with Yudo. Yudo is our Et Ranger. He is our main character. He is currently still the only Et Ranger that we have, although I do have pretty good reason to believe that that will change at some point in the future. Not necessarily the near future, but eventually. And Yuto is level 10. Unlike the spirits, the Et Rangers promote at level 24, so he doesn't get the same advantage that many of the other spirits get, although whatever advantage you get from promoting seems to be kind of arbitrary depending on the spirit in question. But Yuto is still probably maybe our best character. At least top 3. He works pretty well in every role. Obviously his weakest role is going to be Defender, because his best blocking ability only has a 260 potency, which is only slightly better than Hellions, but Yuto has the distinct advantage of having 3000 HP at level 10. In addition to, as it turns out, really high stat modifiers with 152% attack, 142 defense, and 142 resist, which means that all of his numbers are actually about 50% stronger or 50% better than they look like on paper. All of that to say, Yuto is very strong. Frenzy in particular is a 1500 potency attack, assuming that I know how this works properly, which is basically just a get out of jail free button for a lot of situations. You can use Frenzy to just remove an enemy from a formation. And he has enough bulk that he can tank, and in fact that's where I've been using him a lot, as our 4th tank, or our 3rd tank, I guess, if you're not counting Hellion. And in the support role, he has a unique niche in that his abilities go off at the very beginning of the turn order, or of the round order, I should say, which means that he has the unique niche of being able to heal a formation every single encounter. No matter how that encounter plays out, he will always be able to heal somebody, which is really, really strong. There have been a couple of times in the past couple of missions where I've had to intentionally use weaker attacks in order to guarantee that an enemy survives long enough that we will be able to heal using a green spirit, right? Using characters like Hellion or using characters like Nelly, who have lower total potencies on their attacks, or Aselia for that matter, to guarantee or to better improve the odds that an enemy will survive long enough for the divine magic phase, which is where most of the healing comes from. And the fact that Yuto doesn't really have to worry about that is actually really, really important. So again, I've kind of waxed poetic about that. I suspect that these slots in the future are going to be all-rounder slots, and Yuto is going to be a prime candidate for that, just because of how consistently good he is, both on his own, but also in each individual role in the formation, right? And that's really what you're looking for. Yuto is probably either top 1 or top 2, I would have to say, of the characters that we have currently. And I suspect that he's only going to continue to get better, because he's actually a relatively low level compared to a lot of the other characters that we have. We have Halion at level 12, Celia at level 13, Nanaru at 12, Farin at 18, Nimthor at 14. We have a lot of characters at 10, but we also have a lot of characters above 10. And the fact that he is, competitive with Halion, beating Aselia, competitive beating Nimthor at, an equivalent or lower level, says a lot about how powerful he is and just how kind of stat blessed he is. Aselia is our first sort of main heroine at this point, and she's a blue spirit. She really hasn't changed too much since we really first talked about her. I kind of see Aselia as a little bit of a stat stick. She's got decent bulk, but she just has good numbers on most of her abilities. Even her Ice Vanisher, I believe, does slightly more damage than the other enemy's Ice Vanishers, but her Leap Attack 1 does more damage, Leap Attack 2 does more damage, and Impulse Blow 1 all do more damage. You combine this with a 137% attack modifier, and she just hits hard. She doesn't do anything special. I think she's maybe, in a lot of cases, outcompeted by Nelly and Shia, who both have niches that Aselia doesn't have. But I'm not upset to use Aselia, and I think that that's important. There are going to be times where you just want a character that can do a lot of damage in a single hit or in 2 hits. And having that efficiency is still valuable, even if it's not quite as exciting as being able to bypass defenders or being able to attack 3 times in a single round of combat. So Aselia is definitely still doing very well for herself. I'm not sure where she lands in sort of the grand scheme of things. I think I would probably say that Shia is still our best blue spirit, but again, I imagine that Aselia will continue to perform the longer we have her, just given the way that a lot of the other main characters have played out so far, with the exception of Orpha. And then we have Aselia. Aselia really, really benefited from hitting level 10. She went from having like 12 or 1300 HP to having 2700 HP and getting an additional block. And that put her from being, defensively okay, but a little bit of a liability, to one of our best single hit defensive units. Her big sort of detriment, I guess, her big downside is that all of her defensive abilities only activate 1 time per round. So there are going to be times where she might get hit twice by a really powerful attack and will take more damage than she would have if she had like a weaker ability that activated twice. But we do still have a lot of blue spirit enemies with Impulse Blow that attack once per round of combat, and Aselia is able to just totally block them out in most cases, which is very valuable. It increases her longevity. And she can block a lot. She has, 18 total block charges without setting foot in a town, which means that she can enter a lot of rounds of combat. And we can combine that with her offensive suite and her supporter suite. She's actually very good in sort of protracted battles and protracted skirmishes where you're trying to make progress to the next town, but you haven't quite gotten there yet. She has a lot of staying power. She has a lot of stamina, as it were. Because she has, 24 different attacks and 18 different defenses and 18 different supports, she can be in a lot of consecutive combats, especially also with her HP. Her big weakness outside of her block activations is the fact that she only has a 50% resist, and this doesn't seem to be changing, so I anticipate that it probably won't change, which means that she is kind of uniquely susceptible to red spirits and blue spirits and black spirits, for that matter, any spirit that does elemental damage, which will be something that we have to look out for. But for the most part, I think that she is good enough and is continuing to perform well now that she has the extra HP. She is also definitely in the running for one of our better characters, and also in the running for a good all-rounder slot, because she has, you know, good offensive utility, good defensive utility, can boost her own defense, and can heal herself, all of which kind of synergize well together with a unit that's, you know, a unit that's good in every role individually is often going to be good in every role at the same time, and that's really what an all-rounder is. I don't think Aselia is our best defender at this point. I believe that it's probably Nymthor, although that's a little bit debatable. They kind of do different things. I think the big downside is going to be Nymthor's HP, but Aselia is definitely in the contention, and she's one of our better units right now. On the other hand, we have Orpha. Orpha is a character that the game sort of hints that you want to continue putting levels into. I'm not sure that we've gotten to the point where she is sort of paid back that investment yet. Having access to Flame Shower is a good start, but she's had access to this since like level 6, so she hasn't gotten really anything new since then. And she continues to be very fragile. She continues to take a lot of damage from basically every enemy in the game. And unfortunately, she actually doesn't do that much damage with only a 122% attack modifier. She is outcompeted by both Himika and Nanaru in terms of her ability to do damage. It's not all bad. The ability to do AoE damage at all is pretty important, since she's one of 2 characters that can do that currently. But she's not hitting with the power that I would want her to hit with, especially given that she started the game at level 1, so we've had to give her 10 actual training levels, as opposed to characters like Aselia, who started at level 6, or Aselia, who started at level 3, and are performing better with less total investment. I wouldn't say that I'm like disappointed in Orpha necessarily, but she hasn't wowed me yet, as it were. We definitely still use her. Like I said, Flame Shower is very valuable, but she doesn't have the bulk that even a character like Nanaru does. So we have to be careful with the way that we use her, right? She's not bad, but she's not a one-size-fits-all character the way that some of our better characters are. Now, moving on to the blue spirits, we have Shia. Shia has really surprised me. With about the same amount of bulk and about the same amount of offensive investment as Aselia, Shia really stands out for the fact that she can essentially bypass defenders. Now, in a game where defenders can wall your characters for multiple rounds of combat with the right setup, being able to directly attack the enemy attacker or directly attack the enemy supporter is actually really, really powerful. It can totally neutralize a formation to the point where you have what was one of the most dangerous formations in the mission. You one-shot their supporter or two-shot their supporter, and now suddenly you don't even have to worry about them anymore. You can use them as fodder to heal your units or whatever. Shia has that potential. Impulse Blow 1 in particular, because it does elemental damage, does a lot of damage against red spirits in particular. You saw, or maybe I didn't point it out, but in that last mission, one of the reasons why we were able to complete that mission with the formation that we had was because Aselia did like over 1,000 damage with a single impulse blow against that red spirit. And that's like really good if it wasn't apparent. And same thing with the leap attacks. You know, most enemies have more defense than they have resistance, or at least it seems that way. So her ability to kill attackers is not quite as spectacular, but it's still pretty good. And in a game where you can have a green spirit that has twice as much HP as an attacking spirit, like a blue spirit or a red spirit, being able to directly target the enemy that is more dangerous but also more fragile is pretty valuable. She doesn't have the same suite of defensive or utility tools that a lot of the other characters do, like Aselia for that matter, but her raw offensive output, I think, kind of makes up for that. And there's a reason why I've been pairing her with Yuto a lot, is because the two of them together make a really effective team, and they cover for a lot of each other's weaknesses, believe it or not. The other blue spirit that I want to talk about that I think is really performing well is Nelly. Nelly has, at this point, has 2 more levels, so she has a little bit more bulk and a little bit more stat investment. But the ability to attack 3 times per round of combat, which seems to be a consistent through line with all of her skills, or all of her offensive skills at least, makes her really flexible, really versatile. There have been several situations where we have had an enemy that survives on, 100 HP or whatever, that we really don't want to waste a full strength attack on because it's just not worthwhile. The big reason why I think Nelly stands out in that regard is because you can use, a single leap attack 1 and then kill that enemy, and then you still have 2 essentially full powered attacks to follow up with on the other enemies, right? Like if you look at Aselia's stats, for example, or Aselia's potency, her leap attack 2 does 200 damage, or 300, has 300 potency, which is the same as Nelly's leap attack 1, right? So she's doing comparable competitive damage, she's just doing it 3 times per turn instead of 1 time per turn. She also has, I think, the best defensive skill that any of our blue spirits have right now, and at this point she also has access to Ice Banisher 3, which has not come into play yet, but I suspect will come into play in the future. And so Shia and Nelly have really been like the offensive core. I guess with Aselia as well. These 3 have been kind of our offensive core for most of the game moving forward, at least in terms of primary attacker roles. Although, of course, having said that, we then have Himika. Himika is also probably in contention for one of the better characters in our formations or in our party. Basically, all of her attacking skills, all of her offensive skills, do elemental damage, which means that they are deceptively powerful. When you have a character like Double Swing 2 that's hitting for, a 1200 crit on an unprotected enemy, that's pretty... it's hard to ignore, right? Especially when we got her, Himika was running all over the enemy formations. There are several formations in Mission 3 in particular that I think we would not have been able to beat quickly if we hadn't had Himika available to us. And Himika works well in both the attacker role and the supporter role with both Firebolt and Fireball. Firebolt and Fireball have great potencies. She has a pretty decent attack investment, although not fantastic. But again, all these abilities doing AoE or doing elemental damage mean that she just hits consistently harder than a lot of the blue spirits do with the same effective potencies, right? It just seems to be the case that elemental attacks do more damage than physical attacks. And Himika really capitalizes on that. Now, the elephant in the room with Himika is that she has no AoE ability. So I'm a bit torn there. I do think that she is still our best red spirit for most cases, but I would be lying if I didn't say that Nanaru felt pretty competitive in my mind just because of Nanaru's ability to totally wipe out an enemy formation with a single ability. I think Himika is going to be better in more situations, but she doesn't have that same wow factor that a lot of the other red spirits do. And then bringing up the rear of our initial batch of spirits, we have Hallian. Hallian is also level 12. She has access to Accurate Block 3, which is a 300 potency skill that activates 1 time per round of combat, and 2 other block skills, one of which activates 2 times per round of combat. Hellion had her time in the sun in Mission 5, I want to say, where I trained her to level 10 at the end of mission 4, and she got a huge influx of HP, which really allowed her to carry me through mission 4 and partway through mission 5 even, because at that point Asperia only had about 1000 HP and she was pretty vulnerable to a lot of different enemies. I think, I'm not going to say that Hallian has fallen off per se, but we're starting to see a lot more enemies that have a lot higher, or a lot stronger offensive abilities. And so in those situations, Hallian's just sort of raw bulk is not quite as useful as it would be if she had a better defensive ability. And she also doesn't have very good offensive ability either. The big niche that Hallian has is that she has a tremendous ability to heal. Even her Harvest and her Earth Prayer heal for more than other characters, but Earth Prayer 2 in particular, being able to heal for 45%, I haven't used it a lot, admittedly, but the times where I have used it have been kind of game changers, to be honest with you. It adds a lot of longevity to your formation, and there were several situations where I used Hallian to heal Asperia, for example, which really, again, turned the sprint into a marathon, right? And a lot of these missions have been marathons rather than sprints. I think Hallian is probably the worst of our 3 green spirits at this point, and is probably the worst of our tanks, period. Outside of Hellion, for obvious reasons, and I guess probably better than Farron as well, but she's certainly worse than Yuto, Asperia, and Nymthor. But she's still a green spirit, so she still has a lot of HP. She has, twice as much HP as Aselia, or, well, Nanru has a lot of HP, but she still has a lot of HP, which gives her a lot of natural bulk. And technically she has a better defensive skill than Yuto does. So she's a better defender on paper than Yuto is. But again, I think Yuto is just more versatile. So again, I don't want to be too down on Hallian, but I do think that this is a character that probably had her time in the sun previously. It is maybe not going to have that same level of versatility moving forward. Although I'm sure when she reaches the next promotion threshold, she'll get another, huge burst of HP and she'll be good again. But as she is right now, the other green spirits are a high enough level that they're competitive, which means that her main claim to fame, both when we first got her and, for several missions after that, her HP is no longer quite as much of a game changer as it would have been. And those are sort of the crop of spirits that we had initially. For the most part, they're all performing pretty well. I would say the one that's performing the worst is probably Orpha. But even then, she has an AoE ability, so she still has a niche. She's just not as offensively or defensively minded as I would like her to be. She has a bunch of resistance, which is weird, because she doesn't really have enough HP to back that up. But none of these units are bad, right? And I would actually, talk about Hellion at this point, but I'm going to save her for last for reasons that might be obvious at this point. I believe it was in mission 5 we got access to Celia and Nanaru, so I have these characters listed next. Celia is probably our least impressive blue spirit. She doesn't have the raw output that Aselia does. I think Celia's big sort of claim to fame is that she got her offensive abilities sooner than a lot of the other characters did, but the trade-off for that is that they do less damage, right? So she has access to Fury, for example, but it does 800 potency instead of 1000 potency. Stuff like that. And so the reason why that becomes a little bit of a problem is because it means that she underperforms compared to other characters with similar skill levels, right? Even something like Fury 1 is going to be a little bit harder to use because it's now no longer better than Impulse Blow, right? It only activates one time per round, it does 800 damage. It's not bad, I'm certainly happy to have it. I'd rather have this than Leap Attack 2, or Leap Attack 1. but it's just not as much of an upgrade as it probably should have been. And if you look at her skill usages, she has odd number skills for skills that activate twice per round of combat, which means that she doesn't even really get full utility out of these abilities either, right? Unless you can plan out a route where she's able to kill an enemy with a single hit, you're going to end up in a situation where she's just not going to be effective for a round of combat because she can only attack once instead of twice. I think offsetting that is the fact that she is actually pretty bulky for a blue spirit with 1700 HP is nothing to scoff at. She has more HP than Nelly would probably, although maybe not as much as you would expect. But she also has Water Shield 4, so she's a versatile unit in that regard, right? You can take her from the attacker role and put her in the defender role in a lot of situations, and she'll do all right, right? And then she also has access to Ether Sync. Ether Sync is not an ability that we've seen yet, but it's an ability that we're going to see for the first time with the enemies in this mission. Their Ether Sync is going to hit quite a bit harder than ours will, admittedly, but the fact that she has access to this does mean that we can now put her in a support role and she can do damage. I think my expectation is that this is probably something that other blue spirits are going to have access to at some point, so this will stop being as much of a selling point for her in the same way that having access to Impulse Blow early is not as much of a selling point now that we have other characters with access to Impulse Blow. But the fact that she has it at all is probably is a mark in her favor, right? And that is one of those situations where she gets access to the abilities early. They do less damage, but there's value in having those abilities, period. And that's kind of where Celia ends up. She's not like our heaviest hitter, but she is maybe the most versatile of our blue spirits, actually, which is kind of weird to say. And she's a good sort of sneak peek of what the other blue spirits have in store. I would still put her probably at number 4 out of the 4 blue spirits. But again, you know, we have 4 blue spirits, we have 4 formations. She's doing well for herself. She's not, like, falling behind necessarily, but she's not really exceeding anybody else. She doesn't have the same niche that the other characters do. She's usable, but I would rather use the other characters in most cases. Nanaru, on the other hand, has really surprised me. Obviously, her skills like Firebolt 1 and Lightning Fire 1 are kind of jokes. 80 potency is not a lot, even when you have, 183% attack efficiency or attack modifier. This just is not doing enough to be relevant, but that being said, she has a lot of HP for a red spirit, which means that she is surprisingly tanky. I don't care about necessarily putting her in the defender role, although I certainly could, but just having 2,000 HP means that she's not really afraid of other red spirits, she's not afraid of other black spirits, or even other blue spirits in the way that she would have been previously, right? Before her promotion, she only had like 700, now she has 2,000. The other big thing that she has in her favor is the fact that her Flame Shower does a lot of damage. You have an 800 potency skill with a 183% modifier. She's like wiping people off the face of the earth. There have been several cases where I have brought her to a fight and she has basically one-shot the attacker, the defender, and the supporter. And you will see that in this mission. And that makes her strangely competitive. Her big problem is going to be flexibility and reliability. She really only has one skill that's worth using, which is a little bit of a bummer. But in sort of shorter skirmishes where there's not as much, or missions where there's not as much distance between towns, right? Or missions where you're spending a lot of time in town defending against enemies that are trying to take the town, she's maybe the best character in the game right now in terms of raw damage output. Which is kind of insane and not at all what I was expecting to say, given the way that she performed early on in Mission 5, where she was, like, slightly better, but otherwise comparable to Orpha, she just blows Orpha out of the water at this point. I don't know that she's better than Himika, just because Himika is more versatile and still does good damage, but I think Nanaru is certainly competitive. And then the two new units that we just got, we have Nymthor and Farin, a green spirit and a black spirit. Nymthor is really interesting. She comes to us at level 14. She's a little bit understated given her level. I think if you look at a character like Aselia, for example, you know, Aselia has better attack and better defense investment. Hellion has equal defense investment, and both of these characters have more HP than Nymthor does. But the big thing that Nymthor has is that she has a really powerful block skill that activates twice per round of combat. There's going to be one, maybe two enemies in particular that I can think of off the top of my head in this upcoming mission, where this right here really, really matters. It matters a lot, actually. Other than that, I mean, she's not, like, spectacular. She has Power Strike, but she has two different versions of Wind Whisper, which I basically never use. It's not that it's bad, it's just I would rather, you know, heal somebody or just not take damage entirely. But Accurate Block 5 and Accurate Block 4 in this case are just nuts defensive skills. And I think Nymthor really exists as a sort of catch-up character. You know, this mission in particular has a pretty high jump in the difficulty of enemies. So I feel like the game sort of gives you Nymthor as a catch-all, where maybe you haven't been upgrading your green spirits properly, and they're not quite strong enough to survive some of the enemies in this mission. Nymthor kind of solves that problem for you, especially if you pair her with a if you pair it with another green spirit. I will say, looking at her stats, her Wind Whisper is actually better than I thought it was, because her Wind Whisper actually heals in addition to supporting defense. So it's actually a lot better than I was giving it credit for. She is probably our best defender at this point. I think even the fact that she has less bulk, like meaningfully less bulk, let me be clear, she has meaningfully less bulk, but her defensive skills are so powerful, right? Having a 550 potency block that activates twice per round of combat, she just takes so much less damage than the other green spirits, and she's probably our second best character right now. I would say it's probably Yuto, and then Nymthor, and then maybe Shia or Himika or Nanaru. Like, that's the top 5, right? In my opinion. And the fact that we just sort of get the character for free like this is kind of a big deal. That being said, let me see if I can pull it up real quick. If you will just give me a second. And pull up the class titles in the guide. Something that's important to note about both Nymthor and Farin is that they come pre-promoted. Why that's a little bit of... I shouldn't say it's a problem, but it does create an interesting sort of dynamic, because she promoted with less than 50 mind, which means that she is locked into a promotion pathway that requires her to have less than 50 mind for basically the rest of the game. I don't know how much of a problem this is going to be. I guess it's a good opportunity to see what the different promotion pathways offer. But without using a sword release, we can't put her on the, you know, high mind path. Like, she's basically stuck as in the Ostet path. I don't know how much that matters again. I haven't played that far into the game. But it's something that's worth pointing out, because so far my goal has been to keep all of the characters as high mind as possible. And with Nymthor and Farin, that's a little bit counterproductive, because if I want her to promote, for example, at level 20, I need to keep her mind below 49, or below 50, which means that I have to play with these characters differently than I would have with my other characters. I don't think it'll be a big deal, but it is worth pointing out. And then Farin is pretty good. I'll go into this a little bit more with Hellion. She, I think, does suffer from the fact that she is a Black Spirit. But she's a Black Spirit with a 210% attack modifier and an attack skill that does elemental damage. So she hits pretty hard, right? It's just that she has the same problems that the other Black Spirits have, which is that she's not that tanky and actually not that good at killing things most of the time. But she's... I don't know. She will do damage. It's just... I just can't help but feel like Black Spirits are a little bit uncompetitive right now. The big thing that Farin has to her credit is her massive HP pool. Like Nimthor, she is a character that has to stay below 49 HP or 49 mind in order to continue to promote. We'll see how much that comes into play. Right now, I think Farin kind of gets use just by virtue of the fact that she is better than Hellion, which is not saying very much, but I imagine that she will probably get dropped out in favor of some other characters down the road, right? I'm pretty sure that we get access to other Et Rangers in this game, which means that some of these characters are going to have to get dropped at some point, and I suspect that Farin will be one of them, just because I don't know how much I value the support skill set and how much I value her offensive skill set. But we'll see, right? That remains to be seen. And then last of the spirits, but unfortunately probably least, is Hellion. Now, to her credit, Hellion is a level lower than any of the other characters, in that she is only a level 9 character. But she started at level 1, and she's been given a lot of investment, and she really has not, in my opinion, lived up to the expectation that I had for her, which is that she has like a barely break-even attack modifier, a negative defense and resistance modifier. She doesn't do very much damage. She takes a lot of damage in a lot of cases, doesn't have very much bulk, and I'm just not super convinced that her utility is that powerful. Now, I have used her utility, right? Don't get me wrong. So it's like not nothing, but when you compare her to any of our other characters, I mean, she's a worse defender than our blue spirits are. She's a worse attacker than our blue spirits are. And she's just not competitive right now. I hate to say it. The good news is that as long as she is not deployed, I can train her at any time. I'm not going to go crazy with this. I think my goal is probably to keep her at the same level as the next lowest unit. So in this case, I'm going to level her up to level 10, for example. Just so that she doesn't fall too far behind. But I really don't know what to anticipate with this game in terms of the number of units that we're being given. So it may be that we have to use everybody. It may be that we have to cut, half of our current roster in favor of other characters. I really don't know yet. I know there's at least one other character that we gain access to, and I believe there's probably 2 or 3, maybe 4 other characters that we gain access to at some point, just based off of my vague recollection of the game. But I don't know that for sure, right? And so it's very possible that Hellion might make her way back onto the team, and so I want her to be ready for that. But I think it's kind of telling that the way I used Hellion in like the last mission, for example, was as like a backup defender, but also as a character that I was planning on not being able to kill the enemy so that I could get more healing done, right? And don't get me wrong, there's value in that utility, but I could also use characters like Orpha or Nanaru to do that. And both Orpha and Nanaru both actually do damage in addition to not doing damage, whereas Hellion kind of just doesn't do damage, period, unfortunately. But I guess with that being said, that's kind of everybody. The 2 new units that we've gotten are pretty powerful. We're happy to have them to the team. But, I mean, outside of like maybe Orpha and definitely Hellion, most of these units have kind of outperformed my expectations. They're interesting. I guess maybe Celia as well. Also, Orpha, Celia, and Hellion are maybe a little bit underwhelming, but everybody else has been pretty interesting to play around with. And I do like the fact that they're all kind of different from each other, because it means they're all a mystery that you have to unravel, right? You don't really know what you're getting until you actually invest in them. And so far, they've all kind of surprised me. Nanaru in particular has really surprised me. And Shia. But those are the characters that we have now. These are the characters that we're going to be using for the next mission. These are the levels that they have. These are their stats. Let me see. I can pull up the formation just so you can see it. This is going to be the formation that we use for the next mission here. Just to get it out of the way, we're going to have... This is going to be the formation that we use for the next mission. We are going to do a little bit of training for the next mission, but this is going to be, by and large, what our setup looks like for the next 2 or 3 missions, if I had to guess. So, hopefully this sort of explains why I've leveled the characters that I leveled. We hit some pretty meaningful breakpoints here. Getting Nanaru to level 10, getting Aselia to level 10, getting Shia to, like, what was it, level 8, level 9, getting Celia to level 13. I think these are pretty important breakpoints. Getting Hellion to level 12. I did experiment with this a little bit, so I'm pretty happy with where these characters are now, and I'm confident that they will be able to beat the upcoming missions. I hope that this was interesting or informative and that you enjoyed listening to me ramble about the spirits for 40 minutes. I think that this game has been proven to be surprisingly complex and surprisingly engaging, and I'm excited to keep playing, and I hope anybody who happens to watch this is also excited to keep playing. And I think that's just about everything that I had to say, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.